All right, welcome back to Specialness. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Kim.
And we are continuing our discussion about our neurotypical child living with our special needs child. Where we had left off, our son Jackson was just kind of finishing up elementary school, so he was about to enter those formative middle school years. So here's where the fun begins, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Because as we know, middle school isn't really fun for a lot of kids.
No, it's a social jungle.
It is. Kids become mean, maybe cliquish. If there's anything different about you, it gets pointed out.
They pick up on it.
Yeah. A lot of being made fun of, that kind of stuff. And we noticed that starting to happen with Jackson because, like you just mentioned, where we left off, he started to notice more so that his family was different. When he was really, really little, it wasn't, not that it wasn't important, but it's just like, whatever. But,
yeah.
And it was hard for him. I'm not saying it wasn't, but when you get to this age where it's almost like he's self-realization, where, you know, he's able to look around and say, they don't have this problem, or their brother doesn't act like that, or their sibling, or both their parents are at their games or whatever, that he really started to see the difference. And middle school, he had gotten a phone. A lot of his friends had phones. We were monitoring the phones.
Like everybody, we were monitoring the phone, sure.
The phones. And we found out that Jackson had confided or told somebody.
Someone found out.
About Kaysen. Because if you remember, I had mentioned last time that he didn't tell people that he had a brother. Even when he was really little, you know, the teachers had no...
Much less that he had a special needs brother.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the one time he does end up telling somebody, that completely backfired on him. And text chain group, whatever.
Yeah, it was about a game server or something. You know, and everyone's just kind of talking on it.
Yes. And Jackson didn't know how to respond to that. And there was a whole group of boys on that text chain, and really only one but responded.
Well, just said, you know, hey,
that's not cool.
That's not a cool thing to say.
But it didn't stop the conversation from going on, and Jackson feeling very alone and kind of shut down even more, you know, where he was like, gosh, if I said one thing, I told one person about Kaysen, and this is the response, and now all these boys, you know, are making fun of him or making fun of his family.
Well, he was getting a dose of, you know, what parents deal with.
Exactly.
You know, the bottom line is that in most cases, you know, in all cases, a mental illness or a cognitive, you know, issue is not really the fault of parents, but they are judged for it. And I think that to some degree, that's kind of what Jackson was experiencing, even though it wasn't him. And even though it was, you know, we didn't hide the fact that both of our kids were adopted. So Kaysen and Jackson aren't even related, technically.
But I don't know how many of his peers or people knew that they were both adopted. Because remember, he didn't talk about that. And so...
Either way, he certainly took it as that it was a reflection of him. You know, that he had we always called it special needs, but now the word retard has been introduced.
Right.
Which is, you know, not a kind word to use to describe
someone. He knew that wasn't the appropriate word to use.
Right.
And he just did not know how to respond to that, really and truly. He was very conflicted at this time because he loved Kaysen in his way because he was his brother. He was annoyed by Kaysen. He was embarrassed by Kaysen. He was angry at Kaysen. But when that happened, there was this protective side of him came out and was like, he didn't say this to these people.
Yeah, it didn't manifest itself.
No,
like,
but he said it to us.
Yeah.
Where we were like, oh, okay, so there is a little bit, because he'd shown a lot of anger and frustration towards Kaysen, but he showed it to us that he was kind of like, why are people so mean?
Yeah, unfortunately, it didn't cause him to, he didn't stand up to anybody, or what it really effectively did was it made him pull back.
It pulled back.
He became much more, which again is not really unlike us. Different reasons, but not really.
Right.
You withdraw from your social circles, your peers, because in our case it was too difficult just to have him around and do things normally. I think indirectly we didn't like the judgment, but
or just feeling misunderstood.
Sure.
And having to constantly feel like we're having to justify ourselves, our actions, what we were doing, Kaysen's behavior, whatever.
But we were adults.
Exactly.
And he's 12 years old, so he didn't know how to deal with that.
No,
so he experienced those feelings of inadequacy and judgment and frustration and internalized them.
Yeah.
It really made him pull back. And unfortunately for him, I think that I think he would say he didn't didn't like school. I mean, we've kind of talked about that with he has ADHD, and so school was not his thing. But
even though he's brilliant.
Right, he's very intelligent, but he just doesn't. School's just not for him.
No,
academic school is not for him.
What's the point of having to read poems?
Yeah,
and he's like, seriously, this.
But the social side, he didn't end up really having a whole lot of that with his school peers. Because I think he ultimately, a few people said some things that led him to believe that everyone was saying those things, whether they were or not, and he just sort of pulled back from everybody.
Yeah, he played soccer from literally like pre-K all the way through about 8th grade
with all the same guys.
Yeah, and most of the same guys, and he was a good soccer player, and COVID did not help because COVID was the second half of 8th grade, and then going into 9th grade he was homebound.
And in his defense, he was further ostracized because having a special needs child with an immune deficiency situation, we couldn't risk not wearing masks, not getting immunizations, not sheltering in place.
Right.
We didn't have the luxury of having a political opinion about it. And we couldn't let Jackson go back to school, even though almost all the kids had gone back to school.
Right. Especially that second half or first half of school opened back up. When
school opened back up in the fall of 2020, a lot of kids were going back.
Yeah, and he wasn't able to go back.
And he wasn't able to go back.
And so that did affect soccer. And he made the decision. He was like, I'm just not going to play. And
well, we made the decision he wasn't going back. And that, I think, that's one of those unfortunate collateral damage situations of our unique situation, because making that decision for him, whether he wanted to go back or not, was not up to him.
Right.
Whether or not he was going to be able to re-engage socially
when everybody else was.
When everybody else was. So he's now further isolated, looked at as weird.
Different. Yeah, his family's being different from everybody else.
Well, and the fact that there was political stuff about whether or not you went back to school or not, that was one reason why people were or weren't going back. But that wasn't why we did it. But the perception was there. Kids were talking about it. Kids were talking about whether
wearing masks.
COVID was real or whether he had to wear a mask
and
or
here
whatever.
he is.
And he just doesn't have a choice.
He didn't have a choice. Because of Kaysen. And, I mean, he eventually went back to school and stuff, but
But by the time he did, he was very, very peripheral to everybody.
Yeah. And that was unfortunate. Yeah. The blessing in all of that was he, in middle school in 6th grade, got real involved in our church youth program. And he was in the same small group from 6th grade all the way through graduating high school. Mm-hmm. And that's where he kind of found his people and his place. And he felt understood there. He felt accepted there. He knew that Kaysen was accepted there. I think we've mentioned before that our church, Bent Tree, is very accepting of special needs, and they have a special needs Sunday every year. And Jackson was never embarrassed, I would say, when...
I think he still kept a pretty tight group of friends. It wasn't like he was, completely isolated from everyone at school and then just the life of the party at the youth group. He had a tight circle of friends, but he definitely felt more comfortable there.
Much more comfortable.
And nobody was talking about Kaysen the way that he had what he experienced in that group chat or anything else.
Whatever. It was very, very different. And I think a lot of it was because he knew that our church had accepted Kaysen and our family. There had never been any, why are you guys here? Or he's different, or, oh my gosh, your brother, it just wasn't like that. And his 2 small group leaders knew, we told them, just FYI, this is the situation. And they were very supportive of Jackson about it. And, so you and I just kind of let him dictate the school aspect of things and be like, okay, do what you want with school academically and socially. When I say academically, I'm not saying go to school or don't go to school. It was just like, we just saw we needed to take any kind of pressure off of him, and let him navigate, especially high school. I mean, that's just a hard time in general. And like coming back from COVID, and he was just ready to be done.
And I think that one of the things that I don't remember if we touched on this when we were talking about his elementary years, but he was originally like in a gifted and talented program.
Yes.
As a result of his ADHD, he was really struggling with assignment completions and stuff like that. So because we were concerned about just his regular grades, we had to pull him out of that so he could just focus on getting things turned in and things like that. I think that he definitely felt some pressure, and I don't know. I don't remember ever saying, we expect a lot from you. Or the bottom line is, I think by the time he was getting into middle school and high school, he was aware, whether he believed it or not, or was happy about it or thought it was fair or anything like that. Expectations were not very high for Kaysen, and why are they high for me?
Right.
That was a really difficult connection for him to make. And because of that, that rippled through all of middle school and high school, coupled with his ADHD, was that perceived pressure that he needed to be a supernatural child. And he kind of railed against that. There was like some intentional sabotage to not be that. And, we were just trying to say, hey, let's just get through school. Let's just graduate.
But I think in his defense, you and I didn't do it intentionally. I don't think any parent does it intentionally. No. But when you have 2 kids, one is special needs and the other one is neurotypical minus the ADHD and dysgraphia, but he's brilliant. I mean, his IQ tests and everything are literally, he's really, really, really smart. So naturally, a parent's expectation would be, oh, that he was going to do this and he wants to do this and, all this stuff. Because like you said, in elementary school, he was in the gifted and talented program. And
He qualified for state
for
math competitions
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think, and obviously, Kaysen wasn't. I mean, we're over here just trying to keep Kaysen alive. So it was so different in parenting the two. I mean, it's not even, there's nothing to compare it to.
Well, the reality of Kaysen's schooling was that, we were really more interested in him acquiring life skills than
social skills. Make him happy.
Yeah, it wasn't really about academics.
No,
I mean,
no, it never.
That is not saying anything about the school he went to or anything like that.
No,
but our expectations of him were that, he's in a place where he is comfortable, where he is learning skills that he will apply in his life.
Right.
That has been magnified at my possibilities, but
right.
His academic prowess was not going to change his trajectory in any way.
And especially when we've talked about, as we found out, his IQ is dropping,
Yeah.
And that once it was dropping to this point, we're like, okay, you and I had that come to Jesus, like, okay, this is who Kaysen is, But with Jackson, early on, especially in elementary school, I think he felt from us, even though we didn't sit down with him and say, okay, we expect this, this, and this from you. But I think just in certain little comments, we might say like, did you study for your spelling test or anything like that? He started to interpret as pressure.
Yeah.
And mom and dad expect me to get straight A's or to be something that maybe I don't want to be, because they're not doing that with this.
We talked about the switch that got flipped. There was a switch where his behavior, his demeanor just changed. When he was young elementary, he liked the attention that he got for making A's or winning a race or, a typical accomplishments of any kind. He really liked that praise. And then
right about sixth grade
when,
the people finding out about Kaysen.
I think there were some incidents where, he didn't perform as well as he thought he might, whether it was academic or athletic or whatever. And that really weighed heavy on him.
And I think that kind of goes back to, the internal pressure that he was putting on himself.
Right.
But I think he took that you and I were putting on him.
Yeah.
Even though we weren't, but he felt that. And so what we just kind of were talking about what we saw at school and how he was kind of pulling away from his peers, getting involved in church group and stuff. But what we were seeing at home at the same time was his complete frustration with Kaysen and us, because he saw everything as unfair.
Well,
everything is unfair.
It was apples and oranges.
Right.
He was dealing with, he had homework, and Kaysen never did. Kaysen's work was graded, but
Well, he saw things like, I would have to do Kaysen's homework with him. It's not like,
right.
And it's not, when we say homework, it's not the same as what a neurotypical child would do. But I remember,
but he didn't see it that way.
He didn't see it that way. But I remember sitting with Kaysen, and remember, he's almost 4 years older than Jackson, doing stuff. Kaysen's homework is way less than what Jackson's doing.
Well, it was stuff Jackson did when he was
in kindergarten
or first grade, maybe.
And I'm sitting there helping Kaysen, and he would get so frustrated. We would do maybe 2 questions, and I'm like, yep, and I would write on the top of like, not happening today, and that's okay. They understood.
That was okay for Kaysen.
But Jackson would see that and be like, why can't I just have a meltdown and say, I don't want to do it, and mom write on my paper, I don't want to do it? Or it's okay. Jackson's not doing it. So everything he started to compare. What's Kason doing? What am I doing? And how are mom and dad treating us?
Yep.
Chores. We were like, okay, age appropriate chores for both boys. Well, obviously Kason can't do the same things that Jackson can do. And again, Jackson's 4 years younger and Jackson can do every one of the chores. But in Jackson's mind, Kason's getting off easy. We're favoring Kason. Why do I have to do this? I have more chores than he does. I'm going to count them up, and it's not fair. And no matter how many times you and I would sit him down and say, Jackson, there's a reason why Kason cannot unload the dishwasher. There's a reason why Kason can't empty the recycle bin the way you can. He would just look at us and be like, you know.
Logically, it's not fair.
Right. And we would tell him that.
Sure. I mean, and we would say how it wasn't fair for us, you know, that we shouldn't be having to do things for a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old that we're having to do. But, you know, what's the alternative?
Right. And I would explain to him, I mean, you're an only child, so you don't understand the sibling thing, but I have 2 sisters. And I would say, you know what, Jackson, if I was in your shoes and I saw one of my sisters looking like they're getting off easy, I'd be frustrated too. I said, we understand your frustration, but there's a reason why we have you do chores. There's a reason why we have you make sure you do your homework and things like that, because we want you to be able to be a successful adult at some point.
We told him we were trying to prepare him for a life that was going to be far different than Kason's.
But
emotionally, though, he just wasn't ready to deal with that.
Not ready for it at all. He
mature-wise, he just wasn't there.
Yeah, and he was jealous of Kason over, I would say, our time, you know, because like you were just saying, we had to do so and still have to do so much for Kason. But at this point, you know, Jackson's in middle school and then, you know, moving on to high school, he didn't need our help to do stuff. He could do it all. But Jackson would look at that, especially middle school. He would look at that and be like, Dad's reading to Kason at night. You know, not that Jackson would want you to read to him at night, but it's just the time.
It was just, you know, he's just dealing in a situation where he's emotionally behind. You know, he doesn't need to be read to anymore, but at the same time, he's a little upset that he didn't get read to enough.
Right.
You know,
even though we did read to him, but it was just he was just jealous of the time.
Yeah.
He was jealous of what he viewed as, I would say, consequences to behavior, because I think we've mentioned this before. In his mind, Kason would get away with things.
Yeah.
Like when Kason would hit the wall out of frustration. And not that we would punish, it's not appropriate to punish Kason, but again, we couldn't go and be like, I mean, every time Kason did that, to be like, okay, go to timeout or what. I mean, it's not the same. But if Jackson, out of anger, punched a hole in the wall, not that he did, but he would want the exact same treatment as Kason. And no matter how many times we would say over and over and over, Jackson, you don't have a mental illness. Jackson, you're not on meds like Kason. We're adjusting medicines for Kason right now. He is going to be more angry or whatever. And Jackson still was like, you're making an excuse.
Yeah.
You know, I need to be treated the exact same way. And then same when Jackson got a phone, we were very strict with the phone on him, because obviously social media and all that. Well, Kason had a phone, not for social media. Kason doesn't have social media still at age 23.
Right.
He doesn't understand social media. He really...
I'm not sure he knows what social media is.
Yeah, I don't think he does.
Yeah.
So Kason would, like, we had taught him to use voice, or MP actually started teaching him to use voice to text and stuff. And so when he would be scared at night or whatever, he has his phone and he could voice to text us that way. And so he always kept his phone, but he wouldn't stay up all night looking at his phone.
Playing games or looking at social media or whatever.
He didn't play games on
Right.
I mean, it's not the same. Well, Jackson was like, I need to be able to have my phone in my room. I should be able to have my phone all night. And we're like, no, because first of all, you are 4 years younger, but second of all, you have access to social media and you understand the internet, and it's totally different. And so he would look at that as, this is completely unfair. You're favoring him. And we had that conversation with Jackson so many times.
If we had it once, we had it 50 times.
Like,
yeah.
Trust me.
And the results were not changing.
No, he would still be frustrated, mad, and it's unfair. And how could you, why do you treat cases differently? And I remember one time we actually sat Jackson down and said, you know what, Jackson? If you think it's so unfair of how Kaysen's being treated, and school and all that kind of stuff, it's like, what if we will start treating you just like we treat Kaysen? And I said, but if we do that, that means you're not going to get a driver's license. You're not going to go to college. You're never going to move out. You know, we listed everything Kaysen's never going to do.
And that was just us trying to change the narrative of the story we've been saying. Instead of it being about what he is going to be and what Kaysen's not going to be, we flipped it around to say, well, if you think Kaysen's got it so great, here's what your life would look like.
Right. Like, you're not going to go to summer camp.
And his initial reaction was, that sounds great.
Yeah, he did. And I was like, oh, that kind of backfired. But it didn't take him long to be, because we were like, if that's the case, then give us your phone, and you're not going to have internet. You can't go to youth group on Sunday night, because that's, Kaysen doesn't go to youth group on Sunday nights. And if you want Kaysen's life, we can give you Kaysen's life. And he didn't really like it. But we understand that was his way of showing us his frustration towards us. And
we never did that, but
we never did.
That also did not have, not only did it not have the desired effect in the moment, it also did not, I don't think it played a factor in him finally realizing what was going on.
No, because you and I got to the point where we were like, especially late middle school, we were like, you know what? And I would tell Dr. T this all the time. Look, Jackson's never, when he's old enough to move out, graduate, do whatever, it's like he's going to leave.
He's going to leave and never
He's going to want nothing to do with Kaysen. He's going to never understand the situation. And she kept telling me, every time I would bring it up, she would say, just be patient. She was like, I truly believe once he matures, he's going to be very compassionate and understanding, especially towards those that are different, that to other siblings, other kids that have siblings with special needs. And I just would look at her and be like, nope.
And we had some discussions when we would, we've talked about our pity parties. When we would have a pity party, that was one of the things we talk about, is that, here we are going through the motions of raising these kids that are, we're not doing it right. We're not doing it the way everyone else gets to do it, whatever you want to say about it. And we talked about how, and now our neurotypical child, the one that we, had some expectation that maybe we would have grandkids or a daughter-in-law or, some aspect of normalcy, he's just going to go away and never come back. And that doesn't feel fair, and that doesn't feel right. And how is that our fault? And I mean, it was bad. It was very disheartening, to think about how, you look down because the kids are now, they're both teenagers at this point. And so in theory, most people are looking at the empty nest, which we've also talked about, but Kaysen isn't leaving. Jackson is not happy, and he's got 4 or 5 more years in the house, and it's just going to be difficult, and then he's just going to leave.
Right.
And it was rough. It was rough. It was a hard thing to think about and deal with.
Yeah, and we felt bad for Jackson. I mean, like we've said before, we had tremendous guilt. We did the best we knew to do at the time. He had been in, all different kinds of therapies to help him understand Kaysen and to help him understand us. But living it day to day, we've said it a million times. If you and I as adults struggled with it, how in the heck can we have allowed or not understood why Jackson was having a hard time with it, being a child himself. I mean,
Yeah.
it was hard, but I will say there was light at the end of the tunnel. We held on to faith and hope and believed in what Dr. T said, that if we would just be patient, one day, well, slowly, late high school.
Well, I don't know that it. If you're asking me, I don't know that it felt slowly. It just felt like one day.
Yeah. Okay.
Something flipped, and it was like maybe he's not going to leave forever.
There was a big light switch time, but slowly there were little glimpses of here and there, little things where.
I don't know that I ever saw any of them as was really game changing, but
No. I'm not saying it was game changing, but I'm saying it was something that he hadn't done before.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, something as little as Kaysen needing his shoes tied, and Jackson went over and just did it. That's what I'm saying is simple and slow. Yeah. And it would happen every day, maybe once every 3 months, but it was little tiny things that would start to happen, and I would kind of look around and be like, okay, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But really and truly, he was about 18. I'd say 18 was kind of a light switch. It was just kind of like, I don't know if like all at once he matured, or all at once all the conversations we had with him over the years of like, yes, it hasn't been fair. Yes, it's been hard, but come on.
Yeah.
We're not doing this on purpose. Kaysen's not doing this on purpose. We've tried our best. And it just kind of all came together at once, where he was just literally like, do you guys want to go to dinner or go see a movie or do something, and I'll stay with Kaysen? And
we're like looking around,
who
like, what's
is
happening?
this child?
Yeah.
I'll pick Kaysen up from my possibilities if you need me to. Like I said, he would help Kaysen tie his shoes, help Kaysen do something like read something on the Xbox, set up a game, Kaysen's NBA 2K. Jackson would be like, hey, Kaysen, let me help you with this. Just little stuff.
Yeah.
That all compounded into a big thing where we were like, oh my gosh, it's taken 18 and a half years for Jackson to get to this point.
I do remember that there was for one of the first times, there was an actual concerted effort volunteering to help us with Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
For us, Santa's not going anywhere. So,
the Easter Bunny.
Right. We gotta do all that stuff. So, Jackson actually helped us, that year. And
he was excited about it.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing.
Which we have a mix of feelings about
right.
that. We're like, yeah, because it is so, you just don't expect to have to do that for a 22-year-old. But, he was excited to help out, and that helped. And then I think it really, really coalesced for him when he started the soccer, started playing soccer with Case. And MP introduced a unified soccer league for Plano, so there was hipsters, there was other
community partners,
other athletes with special needs that weren't MP hipsters, but and then there were community partners, people who just played to help out. And Jackson said he wanted to play, and that was
without us prompting.
Yeah, that was surprising for two reasons. One is that he'd kind of lost the zeal for soccer at school, despite it being a very good team, and him being certainly a good player when he was excited about it, and that it was a bunch of special needs athletes and Kaysen. So him wanting to jump in on that was, I think, the first time we were like, wow, something has changed.
Yeah, because Kaysen, the first first year or two that MP had that soccer league, Jackson didn't play. Jackson didn't go to a game.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, Jackson was like, I'll be a community partner. I'll play soccer.
Yeah, no interest to suddenly interest.
I'll do it.
And then that led to him finding out about the FC Dallas unified team, which they wanted Kaysen to play, but we don't think Kaysen can do it, because it requires some travel and stuff like that.
And it's a more intense.
Yeah.
Much more intense.
And we've talked to him about it. We said, if you want to give it a shot, we can. And he was not, he didn't think it was for him. So he is now playing on a unified team that Kaysen is not on.
Right.
And he loves it.
Tried out for it, and he made it, and he travels with them and loves it. And I mean, it's the fact that he volunteers his time to now play soccer in 2 leagues. He goes to, there's a couple different levels of the league for My Possibilities. And so those that are in a very beginning league, or those that are like using walkers or
physical disabilities,
or have never played before in nonverbal autism or whatever. Jackson goes early to those games so he can help them.
Yeah, he goes to help set up. He plays in both levels of the games.
Plays in all the league. Yeah.
He's very involved. It's been really fun to see, and again, just so refreshing that he went from seemingly uninterested in much to having some passion, and we shouldn't forget he has developed an interest in cars, and
very
so
much,
now he's going to be starting a automotive technology program. That's the career choice he's going to go down. So
and so he's doing that, and
so he's found that. It took him a while to find his place, but I really do think a lot of that had to do with the circumstances he was in.
It was wholeheartedly, and it's neat to see him. I would say excited for Kaysen. So like when Kaysen did the culinary classes and stuff at MP, and he actually passed the food handlers thing, and he graduated from the program or whatever. Jackson goes and sees all that, and Kaysen will be excited because he'll bring home a recipe, and he gets it out of his backpack, and he'll be like, "Jackson, look what we made today." And Jackson's like, "Oh, that's good, Kaysen." And now when we play a game together, like if we're playing cards, or Kaysen's favorite card game, golf. In the past, if the 4 of us played and Kaysen got frustrated or whatever, Jackson would get frustrated and be like, "Ugh," and just not play.
He'd almost try to discipline him.
Yeah. Or he would intentionally do something to make Kaysen mad.
Yeah. He'd poke him.
But now it's like, I think we described it best as like that Jackson's kind of on our team. It's like the 3 of us now are all kind of on the same page. And it's like now when Kaysen drops a card and gets so mad and hits a chair or whatever, the 3 of us just kind of and roll our eyes, or we'll laugh at something, and he just gets it now. Like, and we can have conversations with him about Kaysen, and he's interested in having those conversations, where in the past he could have cared less. I mean, he didn't care.
Yeah.
And I don't mean it that he didn't care, because I know he did.
He was just so frustrated that he didn't want to be a part of it.
Yeah, he was just so annoyed by the whole thing. And now that he's on the other side of it, and that he's 19, and that, he's going to school, and he has a job, and he drives, and he can see what you and I for years would tell him.
Been trying to tell him.
You're going to have a life. Kaysen's life's not going to change. Kaysen's life, what you see right now, is pretty much what you're going to get. And
Kaysen's very happy.
Kaysen's perfectly happy.
But what's good enough for what makes Kaysen ecstatic is probably not going to be enough for you,
right.
Jackson. So,
and to watch him, Jackson actually kind of has a little bond with Kaysen over the Dallas Mavericks.
Yes.
I mean,
that started last year with the with the playoff run.
Yeah.
They got really into it, and they've stayed into it. They watch all the games together.
And Kaysen, when Jackson's not home, is Jackson going to come home? Is he going to be home from work? Is he going to watch the game with me? And
He gets excited about it.
And before Jackson would, if Kaysen was watching, he would go watch somewhere else, you know. And he'd get mad at us because we didn't spend time with him when we're like, come sit and watch the game with us.
Yeah.
And he was like, I don't want to be with Kaysen. So then we'd split our time, and you'd go up with him and I'd stay with Kaysen, and it was always a big thing. But you know, now he comes down and he's into it, and so there's hope. Which, again, if you told me 10 years ago, if you told me 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, if you told me,
year and a half ago, I might have said, I don't know.
yeah,
And I know that people out there can relate to this. I know that there are families that have a mixture of neurotypical and typical children, and then the special needs child takes all the attention, and it presents a parenting conundrum.
it does. And especially when, like in our situation where we just have 2 kids, Jackson, if we had a third that was a neurotypical child, Jackson would at least have another sibling to be that he could talk with and be like, okay, this really does suck.
And you know what I've always said? A third kid would have solved all of our problems. Yeah.
Yeah. But if he had another sibling that was a neurotypical sibling, that he could go and be like, yeah, mom and dad are spending way too much time with Kaysen, or they would have each other, but Jackson just didn't have that.
Yeah.
So when we were with Kaysen, dealing with Kaysen, Jackson was alone. And not that we ignored him, you know, it's not that, but in his mind, in his perspective, it was all about Kaysen, which
we were set up at a disadvantage very early on, and you know, we all did the best we could. And unfortunately, in situations like ours, your best is, you have to just kind of accept that it's the best you can do.
Yeah.
And it may or may not be good enough. There's going to be emotional damage, and you got to do your best to fight through it as best you can.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't want to dismiss at all the difficulties we were personally having with all this. I mean, you mentioned, I think, I don't know if it was the last episode. I think it was the last episode. You talked about how, you know, certainly early on with Kaysen, before we got him on a medicinal cocktail that kind of leveled him out, we were all in an abusive relationship. Yeah. And talk about dysfunction. I mean, we're all walking on eggshells. Then Jackson starts to get mad about the way we're spending a lot of time with Kaysen, which we're trying to do to keep him from hurting anybody.
Right.
And we're not getting to spend time. I mean, it was a perfect storm of emotional hurricanes.
Right.
And what are you going to do?
And we did the best we could, like you just said, with Jackson. And unfortunately, Jackson couldn't see it at the time.
Yeah.
And that's when Dr. T the fact that she just kept saying, keep doing what you're doing. You're helping Jackson. You're doing everything you can do. I think he's going to come around. I really think he's going to come around. And we kind of held on to that hope. Gosh, one day. And, you know, I think a lot of that goes back to our episode on our faith, that we were like, I think there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel. I think just to keep us going, and to keep trying to boost Jackson and give Jackson that confidence, and to help him understand life's not fair, but good can come out of hard situations. And like I said, 18, and it's like someone turned the light on, and he's a great kid. He's always been a great kid and a loving kid. He was given
you got to play the hand you're dealt.
Exactly. And navigating that's just very hard. And I know a lot of the comments we've had on Instagram and TikTok and stuff have been about, oh my gosh, how do you do this? We're so worried about our neurotypical child. What do you do? And, when you're in the midst of that, and when you're literally every day trying to keep one safe, it's really, really hard to think down the line, or what's it going to be? Is this child ever going to love the special needs child, or is this child going to hate us for this? Because there's only so much you can do in that moment.
Well, and you're also, you're living life in 1 hour increments. It's you don't realize, you don't think about when they're 18 until you're in bed at night and you've been through the day and you're like, wow, that was a doozy of a day. I wonder if I did something today that's going to set me back. Well, I just got to get through tomorrow.
Or thinking, gosh, what they witnessed today, how's that going to affect them when they become adults?
And that's when you say things like, kids are resilient.
Yeah, but they can only be resilient for so much.
Yeah.
And, it's just, there's no easy way around it. That's the bottom line. And, looking back on it, I would be like, if there was something you and I could have done different to help Jackson navigate this, the only thing I can truly think of would be for both of us to have done more one-on-one designated time with Jackson. And again, I say that, however, when I stop and think about all those formative years when Jackson was really young, I don't know how we could have done that.
Well, what you're saying is that we would have tried harder than we already tried.
Right.
I don't know that would have created a whole lot more time or not, but
and it's not even
sure.
like, because I was like, okay, maybe if we had scheduled something like, okay, every Tuesday evening, one of us will take Jackson to the park. I know exactly what would have happened.
Yeah, like we could predict what was going to happen on Tuesday.
We would plan something, and if I had said to Jackson, okay, it's Tuesday night, this is your night with Dad, I know exactly what would have happened.
Yeah.
It would have been an utter nightmare with Kaysen, and you couldn't leave me.
Right. So
I say if we do something different, we would intentionally do more one-on-one with Jackson. But
you can't.
I can't.
You can't know if that was possible.
I don't know if. Yeah, I don't.
It's one of those it is what it is situations. I think we do have to accept, and anyone out there has to accept that you do the best you can, and you rebuild the bridge and you mitigate the damage all along the way, and you just try to come out in the end, not totally battered.
Yeah.
Able to keep going.
And, now that Kaysen's 23, 20 years ago, there weren't the resources in the books and stuff that. And
20 years ago, we didn't know nearly, but forget what was out there. We've relied on the experience we've gotten along the way to problem solve. You don't, I don't know if you ever become an expert in leading a special needs family, but you certainly are better at it the longer you do it.
Yeah. But think about, 23 years ago, the internet was not what it is today. It's just across
the resources were definitely much more limited.
But to think now, like if we had the resources that are out there now back then, I was like, the amount of books that we could have, children's books that I know are out there now about reading to your child a story about having a special needs sibling, or an angry sibling, or getting into group. I know there's therapy groups designed specifically for siblings of those that have special needs siblings, know, and I think Jackson would have done really well in something like that because he wouldn't have felt alone. But again, that's
none of those things existed.
They didn't exist. So to kind of wrap up, I think this episode, I want to kind of read a couple questions. So we asked Jackson. He is not an on-camera kind of guy.
No, he is not.
He's like
he's an off-camera kind of guy.
Yeah, he was like, I am not doing an interview. I'm not going to talk to anybody about this, but you can ask me questions. And so we asked him a few questions the other night.
We asked a few questions that we got something other than I don't know.
Yeah.
Too. So those are the
Exactly.
ones we're going to cover.
So the thing that actually stood out the most to both of us was his response to when we said, what do you think about your childhood? Early years.
What are your memories of your childhood?
And he literally looked at us and said, I don't know. I really blocked most of that out. It's not.
That's not, he said, I don't really remember much before about fourth grade.
Right. Because I blocked it out. And that's because there wasn't a lot of good. There were moments for him and, things like that. But
all that trauma that we talked about, there was some rough stuff when he was, young.
Right.
He was young.
So I thought that was interesting. Okay. So I said, what, if you can think of a memory, what would that memory be? And the first thing he said,
any memory. Yeah.
The first thing he said was he remembers Kaysen wanting to throw our dog Maggie into the fire.
Yeah. Which is, I would like for him to have a different memory than that, but because
the voices were telling, and Jackson was little. So I was really kind of surprised considering he had just said, I don't have many memories. But he remembered being so, hearing.
He was probably 2.
No, let me think. Kaysen was like.
Wasn't he like 6?
No.
7?
No, he was like 8. So Jackson was about 4.
Okay, yeah. 4, yeah.
Yeah, and he vividly remembers that, thinking, why do you want to throw the dog in the fire? For Jackson at 4, that's the memory he comes up with. The second one he said was when Kaysen was in the hospital for the week with lithium toxicity and how he ended up having to stay a whole week with Mimi and G. And it was one of those situations where on that Saturday morning, we said, bye, Jackson, you're going to go to Mimi and G's. We'll see you tonight. And then we didn't see him for a week.
Yeah.
And he remembers that. And it happened to be an ice storm during that week too. And he remembers that. But his 2 biggest memories were not joyful moments.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, what was the most difficult thing for you growing up with
not one of those 2 things.
Kaysen?
Yeah.
And he said having to be by himself a lot because we had to deal with Kaysen. And then he also said, and not being able to do a lot of things with other people. So he knows, and knew at the time.
Which is ironic. We would probably say those same things, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I regret or that I think about is that we haven't been able to spend a lot of time with other people because of our situation, because it's too difficult to do.
Yep. And then I said, so that was the difficult. I said, what didn't you like the most? Like, what bothered you the most? His number one thing was the fact that he looked at everything as unfair, that that Kaysen got all the attention, good or bad attention, in his view, growing up. He just did not understand it at the time, the unfairness and the attention, and that so much of our conversations and so much of everything was about Kaysen, and he's going to, Kaysen has this and we have to take Kaysen here and stuff. And he interpreted all of that as being, we're favoring Kaysen. But the thing that also was interesting that he brought up was how he didn't like the feelings that he got when he would be around his cousins, who, and him seeing their relationship.
Their brotherly, sisterly relationships, yeah.
Yeah. And his other cousin, the 3 brothers, there's no special needs on either side. And so when we would go to Florida or do a summer thing with the whole family, and, our differences stood out very well,
Because we had to take a toilet snake with us on vacation.
Yes.
We'll have to talk about that some other time. It was a little different.
Totally very different. And when Jackson was taken out of that and he was put with and around his cousins and see how fun the siblings all had, and that they can run and jump on each other and wrestle and touch each other without someone yelling and saying they want to kill them. Totally different. And so that kind of stood out to us. But now we asked him, like, what's your view on all of this today, being almost 19 and a half? What's your view? And he said that he totally gets it now, that he can see from our perspective, our vantage point of how hard we had it, and that there wasn't the favoring of Kaysen. It wasn't, being unfair to Jackson. He sees now, he was like, I can understand what you guys were trying to show me and try to tell me, but now, he was like, I don't want Kaysen's life. And you guys have had it hard too. It wasn't just me.
Yeah.
So that was it was just eye-opening to hear him say those things. But I was a little taken aback that his memory was of Kaysen hallucinating. And that just
it made me wonder how I would answer that question. So I don't know. I don't know that I was as surprised by it as I was saddened by it, but
Yeah, because the question wasn't, what was your biggest memory of Kaysen?
Right.
It's like, what was your memory? Because he was like, I don't have a lot of early childhood memories. And I was thinking, well, gosh, he could talk about being in Cub Scouts or playing soccer,
or camping, or
with the Y guides, going camping with you. But no, it was the fact that Kaysen, he remembered being afraid. Kaysen was going to put her dog in the fire, and that just right there sums up Jackson's life. That at 19 and a half, that's the memory he has, and that's the life he's had to navigate.
Yeah,
and it's been hard, but he's done a good job, and he's come out, and we've come out on the other side. So we want to give those of you who are in the midst of
the same situation,
just
a little bit of hope.
And stay on keep plugging on, and just show your neurotypical children, give them a little extra attention, a little bit of extra love, but they'll come through, and they'll see your hard work. I don't know if that's the right word, but they'll see you in the long run. And
it's an up note. It may not sound like one, but we're ending on an up note.
It is an up note.
Yeah, I think we're ending on an up note. So,
yes.
Well, that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you next week. And with that, I'm Jeff.
And I'm Kim.
And this is Specialness. Thank you.